This is a brief introduction to variables. Okay, let's talk about variables. Variables are numbers and things that might look like numbers but really aren't numbers. So there are three kinds of variables that we're going to be talking about: interval, ordinal, and nominal. So let's talk about them one at a time. An interval variable is actually what we think of when we think of a number. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, we can add them, we can subtract them, we can divide them. You know, they're test scores, they're IQ points, they're all those kinds of things, right? They're the actual numbers as we think of numbers day to day. Technically, what they are variables where the data can be placed in order and the distance between the items are consistent. So for example, when you go from number 1 to number 2, the space between the 1 and the 2 is the same as when you go from 2 to 3, right? Those values are constant and defined and even. So these are what we think of just as numbers, just regular old numbers. Now, ordinal data is a little bit different. Ordinal data very often looks like numbers, and the most common example of that for those of us who evaluate are Likert scales, right? So for a Likert scale, we have people type in a 1 if they strongly disagree, a 2 if they disagree, a 3 if they agree, and a 4 if they strongly agree. So when we see that data, it looks like numbers, but it's not really a number. It's a number that's representing strongly agree, disagree, and strongly disagree. So technically, ordinal data is data that can be ordered, right? That's what we call it, ordinal. Ordinal data is data that can be ordered or ranked. So we can say one of those is bigger or more important than the other, or smaller and less important than the other, but we can't say how much bigger or smaller, and we can't consistently define the distance between them. So for example, going back to our Likert scale example, we know that strongly disagree is smaller than disagree, right? I mean, we know that that's lower on the scale than disagree. And we know that disagree is lower on the scale than agree. But we don't know that the distance between strongly disagree and disagree is the same as the distance between disagree and agree. Right, we can put them in order, but we can't say that there's a consistent fixed amount of value or distance between those things. All it is are numbers that we can order. And then the third category is nominal data. Nominal data, the word nominal comes from the word name. So these are things that might look like a number, but really is just a placeholder for a name or for a word. So for example, you might have assigned people to departments and you just call the departments 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that's not a 5 like we think about the number 5. I have 5 apples. That's just 5 representing this department over here. Another thing we sometimes see is type in 1 for male and 2 for female. So it just is a representative, just as a placeholder for a name. So technically, that's it. It's just used to represent a category of data. So why do you care about this? Well, you care because a big part of what we're going to do when we analyze our evaluation data is we're going to do some math. We're going to do mathy stuff on our data. And some of these variables you can do math on, and some of these variables you cannot do math on. So which of these can we do math on? Well, interval data, right? For sure, because that's really, those are numbers. So we can do all the math we want on those numbers. On the other end is nominal data. We cannot do math on nominal data. It doesn't make sense to find out if we're asking people 1 for male and 2 for female, it doesn't make sense to average that. I mean, it just doesn't make sense. It's like trying to average the words male and female. It just doesn't make sense. The last category, ordinal data, we should not do math on, right? Because we don't have consistent values to those numbers, but people do it anyway. Particularly with Likert scales. It's very common for those questions to just average what people said for, you know, how much did they agree or disagree. We say, oh, it was 3.5, so the average is people pretty much agree. And So people do it. It's the convention. We'll do it because it's the convention. But we need to know that the answers that you get from doing math on ordinal data are not really answers. They're not really specific answers. They're directional at best. So that's why when you hear someone say, oh, on our satisfaction, question, last time we got 3.4, but this time we got 3.5, so we're doing better. That kind of discrete decimal work has no place with ordinal data. Like I said, it is directional at best. If you average out to 3, you can say, yeah, the average, pretty much people agree. But that's about all you can say about doing math on that data. So that's all that you need to know about variables. There are 3 kinds of variables: interval variable, which are really numbers; ordinal data, which are representing rankings of categories; and then nominal data, which really are just placeholders for words.